All right. Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to some more Freddy Fazbear Fest action. We are on a generational Five Nights at Freddy's run. If I'm not mistaken, since the beginning of June, every single stream, every single upload on the archive channel has been Five Nights at Freddy's related, which is crazy. But I guess that is just what you get when you have a new FNAF game coming out, which there's a lot of lore, a lot of story, a lot of things to talk about, and that's what we're gonna be doing here in this stream. And then you also have the Dead by Daylight DLC that is coming out very soon as well in July, as part of the 10-year anniversary that was announced last year. If you believe that was already a year ago, that was announced. And then, you know, you still have the up in the air stuff with the FNAF 2 movie coming out in December. Blumhouse Productions, if you just so happen to drop an actual trailer and not just like a 30-second teaser, but an actual like 2-minute trailer, we have more FNAF content to talk about. So yeah, June 100% is the month of Five Nights at Freddy's. So if this is getting tiresome, this is getting annoying, that I'm doing just nonstop Five Nights at Freddy's action, there will be a break. We will be doing stuff besides Five Nights at Freddy's. Do not worry about that. But in this moment, in this generational run, we're doing Five Nights at Freddy's because there's a lot to talk about. And what we're doing for today is what I was talking about at the end of the last stream, where we did the end of our playthrough of Secret of the Mimic, of when I was going on the, I guess, tangent review, my positives, negatives, my praises, constructive criticisms. Mainly my constructive criticisms revolved around the story, the direction Steelwool went and everything. Because there's a lot of stuff that Steelwool did in Secret of the Mimic that is kind of similar to what happened with Security Breach, but also not. I relayed the same thing of how both Security Breach and Secret of the Mimic were games that Steelwool made from the ground up, and it seemed to have the same tendency where they threw a lot of stuff out the wall and just to see what stuck, to the point where it became very overwhelming, very confusing in the terms of what's the lore, what's the story, what details are important, what is just random Easter eggs that, is just for the, very important fans like me out there who look into every single detail and every single Easter egg, right? What is actual lore? What's actual canon? It gets very overwhelming, confusing. That was Security Breach. Then you have this game, Secret of the Mimic, that maybe is even more confusing because Secret of the Mimic, if you don't know, I would say is very anti-book, which is ironic because Secret of the Mimic is a game that is based off one of the books. However, in this game, a lot of the story that Steelwool went in is very anti-book, right? A lot of the details in the books is either not in the game or it's stuff that was changed from the book to the game, which is fine. I'm totally fine with that. I'm totally fine with things changing from the book to the game. It's a lot like when it comes to movies, especially like, Marvel, DC, comic book movies, stuff like that, where things will change from the comic book to the screen, and that's totally fine. But when it comes to Secret of the Mimic, not only did a lot of stuff change that was either not in the game at all, but a lot of stuff that we have been told about and have considered the gospel ever since, Five Nights at Freddy's started in like 2014, and people cared about the story, the lore, the timelines. You get to see the Mimic, and a lot of that stuff has changed, is not important anymore, has been retconned. So it's like, what is the story? What is important anymore? Right? Like, for instance, and we will dive into the video, don't worry, I'm just prefacing all this before you dive into the video. But some of the things that changed in Secret of the Mimic story-wise is, for instance, it seems like Steel Wool is giving off the impression that instead of the original core 4 animatronics that we all know and love, Freddy, Foxy, Bonnie, Chica, right? That seems very basic from the ground up that we've known since Five Nights at Freddy's 1. Those are the core 4 animatronics. Like, that's set in stone. That's not changing. Well, then you get to this game. And then, whether you think this ending is canon or not, seems it's a bit different direction. Because in one of the endings in Secret of the Mimic, I'm sure the video will also talk about it as well, but one of the endings in Secret of the Mimic gives off the impression that the original core 4 animatronics is Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, Monty Gator from Security Breach. Freddy's not a thing, which is very different than what you would expect. And the only thing I can come to as an understanding as far as like the lore and the timeline is we know in some Easter eggs, some like digital messages that we get from the duffel bags in Security Breach, and also on Monty Golf stage, there's like a cardboard cutout where it's like Monty in the center stage as the head performer, and then like either the head of Freddy, the body of Freddy, or the entire Freddy animatronic, a stand-in of it at least, is like in the dumpster trash somewhere, basically giving the impression that Monty's a star and Freddy's now in the background in the trash. And we as fans didn't really know what that meant. We couldn't really come to an understanding what that was answering. But now with this, if this assumption is to be correct, that the original core 4 was Monty, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, Freddy came later, that could explain why Monty now has this animosity towards Freddy and then wants to be at the, head stage, wants to be the center of the attention, wants to be the star, and Freddy's in the trash in the background. Because quite literally, Monty was at the center of stage, at the center of attention, but Freddy replaced him, and that's where the animosity comes from. Which, you get an answer for what we've always heard about in Security Breach, but it's not the answer you expect, right? Other things I can also think of, in Ruin, the whole, well, I guess one of the twists. One of the twists in Ruin is the giant blue bunny, Mitsis, M-S-E-S, which can't remember what it stands for, but Mitsis is the giant blue bunny security protocol that you interact with throughout the game in Ruin. And the entire time, it's trying to stop you as a player, Cassie, from disabling all the security nodes. Now, from a player perspective, you would think Mitsis is the villain. They are trying to stop you from, shutting down all the security nodes and saving Gregory. But we know in Ruin, Gregory is not Gregory. Gregory was the Mimic. That was the first time in Five Nights at Freddy's we got an actual look at the Mimic, right? So Mitsis, the bunny, wanting to stop you from shutting down the security nodes, they're not the villain. They're actually the hero in the story, right? They're wanting you to stop shutting down the security because the story ended, the game ended by the Mimic being able to roam around freely because Cassie was tricked by the Mimic because now there's no security protocols and the Mimic is able to walk away freely, right? Now, obviously, Ruined happened way, way, way later in the timeline than the Secret of the Mimic game, right? But the reason I bring that up is because MITS is a security protocol that we believe to have been made by Cassie's dad, who is the character we play as from FNAF VR Help 1 and 2, right? They're the ones that made the MITS's security protocol to lock the Mimic away, right, for good. Then you get to this game, and Fiona, Edwin's wife, is also the MITS's machine. So, how does that make any sense? So, not only is it seems like it's no longer true where Cassie's dad is the one who made the MITS's machine, but the MITS's machine was previously Fiona, who is tied to Edwin. So then how do we go from Fiona, Edwin's wife, to the MITS's machine, the security protocol that we see in Ruin? It makes absolutely no sense. And that's why I prefaced it in my review of the game and everything, of how I was very curious to see how people think about the lore, timeline, story, how people are able to put together a story, because I need an answer. I need many answers. I think everyone needs answers, because I would say without a doubt, this may be one of the most confusing FNAF games we have gotten as far as a story, right? Which is saying something, because FNAF is known for its confusing story, and it's very up in the air, complicated, storytelling, and not really giving you any details, never confirming anything. But I would say this may be the most confusing game we've got in the series, and I feel like that's saying something. So, anyway, without further ado, let us see this FNAF theory and try to piece together what Secret of the Mimic is even about, because I need those answers, and I'm sure you do as well.
Secret of the Mimic is here, and frankly, it's one of the best FNAF games we've ever gotten. It might be my favorite FNAF game they've made so far. It's really that good. The gameplay, the horror, the writing, everything about it I enjoy. But as much deserved praise as the game is getting, a lot of people are walking away from the story a bit confused, which I guess is the mark of a good FNAF game, especially after any other ending besides the first. So what did that game mean? What did its endings mean, and how does it connect to the grander story? Well, Slices, put on your aprons and let's find out the secret of the Mimic. Don't worry, that'll be the only time I make that pun. As far as the basic story of the game, we are Arnold, a sleep-deprived, wet, sopping towel of a man whom I love. We also work for Fazbear Entertainment, and dispatch tells us that we have one last shift for the day. Edwin Murray is a contractor for Fazbear, but he's disappeared. And per his contract, now everything he's been working on is forfeit to Fazbear, so we just have to go and collect whatever he was working on. We're warned that several motion sensors in the building indicate something's moving around, but we're then told it's probably nothing. So we enter Murray's costume manor and quickly find Dispatch through an intercom system in the building itself. Once we're inside and the power's on, Dispatch levels with us. He tells us that the thing moving around is likely an endoskeleton. One of the last things Murray was working on was an endoskeleton that could fit into any costume and replicate the persona of any character.
aka mimicking anything it sees.
It would have been
Hence how it gets the name Mimic.
really useful to have if it didn't have, quote, homicidal glitches. But if we're able to find the original schematics for the endoskeleton, we can not only fix it, but then Fazbear can use it in all of their animatronics. So,
which we know how it gets the homicidal tendencies. Because I'm going to be repeating myself again about the whole Edwin Mimic storyline, but recap once again, Edwin Murray is a genius inventor who is very gifted at turning wood figurine like dolls into like fully formed robot animatronics. And how he creates the Mimic robot that you see right here, right? How he creates it is because he has a 4-year-old son named David, and David, being just like any kid, especially a very young kid, needs a lot of attention from his parent, right? And because Edwin is an independent contractor trying to, make all these like animatronics work to the way that he wants them to, he's not able to spend a lot of family time and everything. So in a way to like, I guess also cut corners, but also to make sure everyone's happy, where Edwin can stay working on what he has to do while also giving his son David the family attention that he needs. He creates this robot creation, this mimic. This mimic robot that is David's best friend and mimics anything that David does. And David loves the thing, and they do everything together, right? Then one day, David is playing outside at, I want to say, a scrapyard, and with the ball. And the ball goes in the street. David retrieves the ball, gets hit by a car and killed, right? And then after David dies, the mimic robot creation that will spend a lot of time with David, coin termed, starts mimicking everything that David did in front of Edwin. Now, Edwin sees this, and seeing the mimic robot creation mimic everything that his now dead son is doing, is full of grief and anger and frustration. So what Edwin does is he takes a steel pipe and beats the heck out of the robot creation because it's reminding him of his dead son. And following beating the heck out of it, the robot creation mimic is now infused with anger and agony, and then goes on a homicidal murder rampage because it starts to mimic the violent tendencies that Edwin was doing to it. Once again, how the term mimic comes into play. So that's a story. I know we've done the story for the millionth time, but just in case anyone is new and or hasn't heard the Edwin Murray mimic storyline, there you go.
Arnold does just that. That's our main goal in the game. To retrieve the original schematics of the Mimic endoskeleton and fix the Mimic so Fazbear can use it in all of their animatronics. As we go through the facility, we have to hide from the Mimic and defend ourselves from the various costumes that it takes. First Jackie in the Box, then Big Top, who I thought was Big Top Music Man, but I think he's only ever referred to as Big Top, but obviously you see the connection here.
I mean, I call him Music Man. Just cuz. It's meme-worthy.
Ollie the Nurse, and Chica. Yeah, literally Chica the Chicken. This story takes place while Chica the Chicken still belonged to Chica's Party World, and was soon to be, or just recently was acquired by Fazbear. Eventually, though, you get the executive status on your data diver, which allows you full reign of the facility and the Mimic schematics.
Which Chica's Party World was very shocking to see, because I think I called it out in my playthrough, if I'm not mistaken, but if I haven't, I'm going to call it out now. Chica's Party World was very interesting because we've only gotten 2 appearances of Chica's Party World in the entire series. It was from one of the 8-bit minigames you saw in FNAF 3 in order to get the happiest day good ending in FNAF 3 to let all souls get put to rest, right? And then the other time was in lead up to Sister Location, in the source code for Sister Location, when the teaser trailer dropped, we saw Chica was not going to be part of the Funtime Electronics. And that was very weird because that was the first time in the series where there wasn't a core 4 member of the game in a Five Nights at Freddy's game. Previously, FNAF 1, 2, 3, 4, because this location was FNAF 5 technically. FNAF 1, 2, 3, 4 had the core 4. This location was the first time where one of those characters, aka Chica, was not playing a part. And the reason is because in the source code, it was mentioning Chica's Party World, which we, as the theorists and the community and everything, equated that to Chica's Party World being some independent contractor, independent company that was later bought out by William Afton and Henry to be part of the Fazbear Entertainment umbrella corporation.
the reason we came here. After a weirdly ghost supernatural encounter with this white tiger costume,
hated it. Hated it. Hated that. I still hate it, and I will always hate it. It irks me that I have not beaten it.
we make it back to the main office and we talk one more time to Dispatch, who says job well done and tells us to return the data diver to Dispatch through the inventory system in the building. This is where we start to get the different endings of the game. If you give the data diver through the inventory system to Dispatch and leave, you're able to get into your van and go. But once you get into your van, Dispatch calls you over the radio and tells you they've been trying to get in contact with Arnold all night, and that they have to fire him because he hasn't been answering his calls. Arnold explains that he's been talking to Dispatch the entire night and just gave Dispatch the data diver, to which the Dispatch in the van says that we admitted giving away company property and that we're going to be sued for losses. But if all that wasn't enough, in the back of the van, Arnold notices a light, and adjusting the mirror, the Mimic tagged along for a ride. It reaches towards us and knocks us out, and we come to inside of the suit of what appears to be a prototype Freddy Fazbear in what appears to be a prototype Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria, right next to a prototype version of Chica and Bonnie performing on stage for the Mimic. Frankly, it's an ending that rightly has been called out as very similar to the main ending of Help Wanted, and that's not an accident, but we'll get there in due time. So that...
It's definitely Prototype 1 animatronics, because not only is the core 3, Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, the ones on stage and everything, but if we go back and look...
the Mimic. Frankly, it's an ending that rightly prototype.
See, you can see Bonnie's guitar. It's very hard to see, but you can see a black and white checkered pattern on the floor, which we know the checkered pattern, especially on the walls, is from FNAF 1.
Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria, right next to a prototype version of Chica and Bonnie performing on stage for the Mimic. Frankly, it's an ending that rightly has been called out as very similar to the main ending of Help Wanted, and that's not an accident, but we'll get there in due time. So that's the basic plot of the game, but already some things aren't adding up. It doesn't take a genius to realize that Dispatch was the Mimic the whole time we were in the building. But if that's the case, why was Dispatch trying to get us to work against the Mimic? Or rather, why was the Mimic hunting us down and trying to stop us if our goal was explicitly for the Mimic? Well, to understand that, and the other two endings, we need to start talking about the stories underneath the surface level of this game, starting with the story of the entire business itself, Murray's Costume Manor, and its eventual downfall. Murray's Costume Manor was originally owned by Edwin Murray's father, Edwin Sr., but working at the facility as a creative inventor, Edwin Murray found great success with his product, the Cleanovac. Frankly, it was the most successful thing he'd ever created. They made statues of this thing. It was so wildly popular. Ever since then, he'd been trying to chase that feeling and make something bigger than the Cleanovac, and failing it every time. Edwin Sr. died a little earlier than expected, and Edwin Murray, still very young, inherited the entire business. He wasn't a businessman, but he would have to try his best to keep the business alive. He kept throwing out more and more Murray co-inventions, but they were often half-baked or had serious problems that weren't found until it was too late. All these inventions ended up causing was more lawsuits and more costs to the company. The costumes the facility created were selling fairly well, and that's where pretty much any of their money came in, because the inventions just kept costing the company more and more. But luckily, while the company was in a
Shot in the dark for a second. This is something that just came in my head as I was listening. We know the common thing of how Edwin and Henry are the same person, different person, but I guess with this game, it's now been confirmed. When Edwin is called Henry out by name, I guess it means they're different people, right? But at one point, they were the same person, right? At least in my eyes, they were. Bear with me for a second. In FNAF 6, right, we believed Henry was the one who built the bunker, built all the animatronics, in the FNAF 6 bunker location pizzeria simulator, right? And some of the animatronics you see in FNAF 6 is Trash in the Game, Number One Crate, Mr. Hugs, the vacuum cleaner. But then we hear about Edwin making the vacuum cleaner, right? Now, bear with me now, because FNAF 6 is the first time in the series where lawsuits play a factor. To me, that's not a coincidence.
Bit of a downward spiral, longtime business partners Fazbear Entertainment approached with a contract that was a bit too big to refuse for how the company was running. If Edwin could get this Fazbear contract done, they'd have enough money for everything to go back to normal. The commission is never specified, but judging from what's been created in-game, it seems to be an entire prototype replica of a pizzeria, befitted with prototype animatronics, a bear, chicken, and bunny to perform on stage, and 2 Springlock suits, Fredbear and Spring Bonnie. Very important note here, these are all prototypes, to the point where the main band looks like they're made out of scrap metal, and the Springlock suits literally have prototype on the back, so I don't think these are the finished versions that end up being used by Fazbear. I want to be clear here on that. Fazbear kept approving the project as it went on, approving all of the art and all of the directions that the things were taking shape in, but as they started getting to the end, Fazbear kept sending more and more change requests, costing more time and money and making Edwin have to throw out months of work at a time. At this point, Edwin was at the end of his rope, the end of his money, and about to lose the only contract that could save this company. But he didn't know until it was too late that this was all part of the plan. On the other side of this contract, whether through jealousy or wanting to dominate the market, William and Henry had planned to ruin Murray Co. with this contract from the start. They wanted to absorb Murray's Costume Manor, all of its assets, and as many employees as it could. So they made a contract with Edwin Murray, one so big that it would nearly capsize Murray's Costume Manor if it failed, but so lucrative that Edwin, who's very trusting and very desperate, couldn't refuse. Especially since it seems as though Edwin and Henry were close long-term friends. They were on a nickname basis, and some lines have Edwin saying, "like we always do." As the company weaned on this secret project, William Afton started secretly contacting several Murray Costume Manor employees and offering them better positions with better...
Let's see here. Also, apologies if my camera is blocking it, but I guess trust my words. We're almost there. I need the rest of the Murray staff contact info. The sooner the better. You get that from me and I can sweeten the deal. How would you like to manage one of the new franchise locations? W.A. William Afton. Ken, after one interview, they offered me the job. It happened so quick. No questions about my work or skills. They asked one question. When can you start? I'm going to make double what I make here. You should come with me. I guess I could also move my camera. There we go. I'm going to double what I make here. You should come with me. There's a referral bonus if we can get more Murray employees to jump ship. Man. So interesting, isn't it? Of how Edwin, Henry, and William Afton, the trio now, are all connected to Fazbear in some way. And like business partners, but also rivals. Like, it's very odd. Speaking of odd stuff, Chica all of a sudden went from maybe the most important character in the entire series based off this game. Because this game, as it's to be believed, Chica is not only a Springlock suit, but also made as early as the 70s, which is when the game takes place, when the Mimic existed. Crazy. Also the obvious Chica on roller skates, which of course, the only other character that we had roller skates was Scrap Baby from, you guessed it, FNAF 6.
better pay, even offering bonuses if they can bring over other Murray's Costume Manor employees with them. To top it off, they made the contract more difficult as it went on, changing requirements, telling them to change everything by the end of it, and just making it generally impossible to work with.
Aren't they insane? The look of these new animatronics is Fiona's design, and they're great. Oh, first they approve the art, then they approve the proofs. Now they change their minds when we're so close to final. Why would they change them now? Are they pulling my leg? The new concepts are frankly creepy. It doesn't matter. I'm not changing a single bit of her work, and they can't make me.
And after everything began to fail and the company begins to default and employees are leaving left and right, William Afton and Henry Emily offer Edwin one final solution, and we get the second half of that letter. Software development and the
Software development and the entire software development and the entire MCM catalog. He would love to keep you on as a lead engineer. Although we now technically own the land, we would never touch the house your parents built. We feel this offer has been more than fair considering how far behind you are. It's just too much for you to handle alone. We're waiting for your response. W.A.
entire MCM catalog. We would love to keep you on as a lead engineer. Although we now technically own the land, we would never touch the house your parents built. We feel this offer has been more than fair, considering how far behind you are. It's just too much for you to handle alone. We are waiting for your response. W.A. At its lowest point, Fazbear buys all of MCM, all of its property, and all of its remaining software. They even offer Edwin a job as lead engineer, but I get the feeling he was never able to take it. In fact, this audio log tells me that this is around the time he shuts himself off in the manor to work on the Mimic some more.
Edwin, never forget.
What?
They're behind it.
What?
Don't trust them. Never tell them. They want to destroy you. Dad was right.
Also, if this video is helpful to you and you like FNAF, I make a weekly FNAF themed podcast and a weekly FNAF or other horror game theory every Friday, so subscribe and stay a while. And if you like gaming, I stream on twitch.tv/RideToastYT 4 days a week, every single week, and I edit down and upload those streams and clips to RideToost, my second channel. And if you like audiobooks or compilations, I upload that to my third channel, RideDoze, and I just started a D&D campaign with these amazing creators as well on that channel. So if you like any of that, go find it. The links are in the description and on screen. Look, I hope this video does well, and if it does, I'm gonna self-indulge a little bit. This business side story is what we begin to see in the two other endings of the game. If instead of giving the data driver to Dispatch, you instead run the parachute.exe program with your newly found executive permissions, a secret hatch opens up in the office. Immediately, Dispatch drops the act and starts threatening you, saying that it's too late, you won't make it out alive, and that it is going to catch you and stuff you into a suit. You go through this secret tunnel to end up at the Welcome Show lobby, to which you can now play the Goodbye Show, which allows you into a lower part of the facility, the same part where that secret prototype Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was being created. Once we get there and turn on the power, the Mimic arrives too, putting on an amalgamation of Fazbear parts and looking really cool while doing it. We have to use the prototype springlock suits that were created here to get into the security office, as Dispatch, or whatever Dispatch really is inside the security office of the prototype Freddy Fazbear's Pizza and is keeping us out using the security cameras and locking doors on us. It's essentially playing FNAF 1 in reverse, which is an incredibly cool concept. Eventually, when we drain enough power, Dispatch relents as there's nothing.
And there it is. There is the Mitz's machine, even though somehow it's Fiona, which makes absolutely no sense.
More they can do, and lets us inside the security office, to which we see this. So if we've been being chased by the Mimic the whole time, what is this? Well, to explain that, we'll need to delve into the personal lives of Edwin, Fiona, and David Murray. Jesus, Mark. Now, I think I should put a bit of a disclaimer at the rest of this video. So far, I've only barely speculated on the lore of this game. A lot of what I've said is pretty much in the text or just barely implied. Like, it's very clear this is kind of how the business stuff went, this is what the Fazbear contract was, yada yada. However, uncovering the true story of Edwin's family life is a lot trickier. There's a lot of weird details that don't perfectly line up that we're going to have to speculate on. So take what I'm about to say about their family with a grain of salt. It could be wrong, but as far as I'm aware, this is my best guess for how Edwin's family life was. And also, in this video, I don't have too much time to go into every piece of evidence as to why I believe this. So I'll show relevant evidence in the background as I mention things, and I'll point out some evidence as I go, but as far as deep dives into the evidence itself, like moon.exe, you'll have to wait for future videos for that, because trust me, we're going to be talking about this game for years to come. Edwin.
Yeah. And I would say as far as the family goes, and sure, this will be talked about, but my main question is, we hear about M1 and M2 in this game. Is Fiona M1 and David is M2, or which is which? Right? Someone, either Fiona or David. One is M1 and one is M2. Which is which?
Met Fiona while working at MCM, and eventually they got married and had a son named David. However, as the business started to go sour, Edwin began burying himself deeper and deeper into his work, ignoring and neglecting both Fiona and David, and eventually tragedy strikes. Fiona went to go help the Fall Fest crew set up for their first annual show, but unfortunately, at that Fall Fest was a fire, and Fiona died inside. This is a deviation from the lore we know from the books, but I think this is the most likely answer here.
Because if I'm mistaken, in the books, Fiona died from childbirth.
As a statue in moon.exe depicts her as burnt with the snow globe of the first ever Fall Fest, and we know from the audio logs that she went to Fall Fest, and after she dies, Edwin's first audio log is, "Why did you go? You weren't even supposed to be there." In her wake, Edwin is at a loss. He doesn't understand how to keep working at his job, keep taking care of his son, and keep everything together. Until eventually, one day, he swears he hears Fiona in the basement of the facility.
Recording? Test. Levels are good. This is where I heard it. It's her or someone that sounds like her. Set frequency to 4625. Hello? Hello?
Oh my god.
Is anyone there? Over. Say something. It's me, Edwin. Over.
It's a voice that's been recorded on devices before, but he swears that it's her spirit manipulating this. So near that basement, he begins working on the Mimic. Building it off of the technology he's already had in several other inventions, his goal is not necessarily to replace Fiona, but to make something that can help him watch David the only way that he knows how. And eventually he does make M1, an endoskeleton that can fit into any costume, change its shape into any size, but most importantly, recreate any personality. And somehow it works, and it adopts the persona of Fiona quite quickly. But M1 tells Edwin to keep Fiona's identity a secret, as the others might not understand. So Edwin presents M1 to David as his new babysitter and companion, something that can put on costumes and play with him and take care of him while Edwin gets some work done. This does sort of work for a time.
I guess Fiona does make sense to be M1, because M2 would be David, because, if I'm not mistaken, Edwin doesn't beat the M1 Fiona mimic robot ever. But we know he beats the David version because it reminds him of his dead son. And M2 is the one that goes to the murderous rampage and is violent, has the homicidal tendencies we hear from the beginning of the game. So, logically, M1 is Fiona, M2 is David. They're both mimics, but they're different versions of the mimic. Got that? Cool.
M1 is Fiona when Edwin's around and just the mimic when everyone else is, and M1 can take care of David while Edwin works. But eventually, tragedy strikes again. On his birthday, David ends up dying at the playground that Edwin built for him, and he takes this loss especially hard. But M1 convinces him there's another way. M1 reassures him that even though this loss was an accident and unavoidable, he can fix it. He's done it before. Look at Fiona. So Edwin tries his best to make M2, a robot that could theoretically replace David, just as M1 replaced Fiona. But for some reason, it just won't work. M1 worked, and he's still not sure why. I think it's likely that M1 is possessed by Fiona herself, and that's the spark that Edwin can't seem to recreate. Eventually, growing desperate, M1 is willing to give up her body so that M2, David, could take it, and M1 can wait for Edwin to make another body in the meantime. So Fiona is moved into the MXES, Mechanical
Mitsis.
X-Form Experimental Storage Container. It's then renamed to F10 and 4, or Leet Speech for Fiona, and she waits there, while Edwin is supposed to make David out of the remaining body. And it begins to work, but it begins to work too well. Edwin starts to realize that this has all gone on much too far. None of this is his real family, none of this will bring them back. And once that robot started mimicking David, copying his mannerisms and acting like him, it was too far and it was too painful. In a fit of rage, yelling at this robot that it's not David and it can't replace him, he beats the mimic and destroys its legs. Soon after, in the manor, an experiment in Edwin's office goes wrong, and an explosion traps him in the rubble. It's unclear if M2 made it this way, but it's clear that at this point, M2 wasn't destroyed, just beaten, as we get this very chilling audio log in the aftermath of the explosion.
Test. Journal entry. Too bad the new power test was a failure.
M2!
Due to a minor detonation.
M2's the one
There is
speaking?
damage to my office interior, as well as a small fire. Note to self, portable cleaner that gets rid of smoke damage. Or better yet, a Cleanovac attachment.
Help! M2! Respond! Emergency! Call for help!
Daddy's busy, buddy. Why don't you go outside and play?
Isn't that creepy? Isn't that true psychological horror? Because obviously we know Edwin would also tell his son David that he's busy with his work nonstop, and now the mimic is doing it back to him as M2, who is David.
Please!
True psychological horror.
I can't move. I can't feel my legs.
You know, speaking of legs, what do you think? I just finished mine. There are still a few kinks to work out.
I'm sorry, M2. I lost my temper. I was always gonna fix you. Please, call for help. M2, respond.
Oh, can't right now, buddy. We can do something fun tomorrow. I promise. Ask your mom if she's not busy.
This is insane.
Help.
And there we have Fiona, M1, inside of the MXES system, and this amalgamation of David and Edwin and the agony involved inside of M2. Again, there is more to this story, especially in Fiona's motivations and possible culprits behind David's death, but those are better served for later videos that focus on those topics. For now, with that context of the family in mind, let's go back to the other two endings of this game. When you meet Fiona in the security office, she tells you that you can still be useful. After all, we've collected the schematics for the Mimic. She's convinced if we can give these schematics to Edwin, he can repair M2 so M2 can go back to being David again. It'll fix this violent glitch in him and he can be their sweet little boy, and Fiona can have a child once more. So you take Edwin's tunnel to the manor itself, and M2 is already pacing the halls looking for you. And here's where you have two endings. The second ending has you make it into Edwin's office after figuring out the code, and that's where you find that it's exploded and you hear that audio log. But you activate cradle.exe, and then attempt to escape. The Mimic and several of the failed Mimic 2 copies,
Which, if I'm not mistaken, the Cradle programming I'm trying to remember. It's like some protection programming for David that the Mimic talked about in one of the files, in one of the emails.
are chasing you the whole time as the facility burns down around you. You do make it to your van, but so do they, and in the car chase trying to escape, eventually the Mimic itself breaks through your windshield and causes a crash. In the wreckage, Arnold seems to maybe die, it's unclear, but the Mimic doesn't go for the kill. Instead, it just takes your data diver, attaches it to itself, and walks off into the night. But if...
Yep, because the Mimic M2 takes the data diver, because remember, throughout the game, we take the data diver as Arnold, and we are going from location to location in the manor, or in the warehouse, I guess, and going up from security. We're starting off like level 1 security all the way to, I want to say level 6, which is the executive security. So now that the data diver has the executive level security and the Mimic now has it, the Mimic now has executive level access to the facility. So now, while having executive level access, they can now make as many Mimics as possible with no regard, no regulations whatsoever, because they have the access now. And that is important because it's believed that's how the Mimic we see in Ruin was made, right? It's a theory out there now that the Mimic we see in the Secret of the Mimic with the executive level access cloned one of the Mimics to be the Mimic we see that's locked away under the pizza plets and chases and tricks Cassie using Gregory's voice in Ruin.
If you've collected every collectible and beaten Moon.exe, which will definitely get its own video, you'll receive the glitched permission to your data diver, which allows you to access all the other doors in the manor. Inside of all of them are cassette tapes with bedtime stories on them. Once all of them are collected, you get event access to this boarded up door, which houses David's room. Once inside, the Mimic exits the closet and begins getting confused on what it's meant to do here. So if you...
And there is the thing I was talking about of a panel of 4 people. You see a bunny, a fox, a chicken, and an alligator. Which is that Steel Wool's saying of this is the original Core 4 Freddy Fazbear game, that Freddy was a late addition, even though it is his name on the brand. Monty was originally part of the game, but Freddy was added later on and then replaced Monty. And that's how the animosity we saw in Security Breach. Very interesting.
You use the storybook recordings of David's parents, M2 will fight back and forth between trying to kill you and trying to be David, until eventually you confuse it enough that you've stunned it and inject the data diver into its programming, uploading the original schematic and repairing M2. Once you've done this, it easily reverts back to David and acts just like him, going to bed and telling his parents that he loves them. So at the end of all of this, which of these endings is canon? How does the Mimic end up at Security Breach after all of this? Does Arnold survive? Well, these are all questions for other days, but I think the most important question that I can capstone this video with is solving what is the secret of the Mimic after all the...
Also, I want to pause for a second because I was just reading the text while the video was playing. If we go back to that, the ending of that David Room, story sequence, they ended the story saying the moral of the story is friendship is the greatest present, right? Earlier in the game, this just clicked it with me. Earlier in the game, when you first get the Springlock suit as the pirate captain, you are on stage with Pirate Foxy, and they're trying to get a birthday gift. And the play ends by saying friendship is the greatest present. I don't know if this means anything, but I just want to call that attention that 2 times through this game, friendship is the greatest present. Want to call that out.
title of the game implies that there is one singular secret that we are supposed to walk away from and know. And we learned a lot about the Mimic in this game. He's got like at least 8 secrets. I think, with all of the information we get in this game, the main secret we are supposed to walk away from, and the thing that explains a lot of previous games made by Steelwool and Scott Cawthon, is that the secret of the Mimic is that there are 2. One of them, M1, was originally Fiona, but is a more digital version of the Mimic, something that's able to replicate personalities. And the other one, M2, is an endoskeleton with violent tendencies that's just trying to lash out against its environment and the world around it that never cared for it. It definitively explains why in the games, Glitchtrap and the Mimic seem like 2 different entities. They are. They're 2 separate iterations of the same idea. But
even though we've had this question numerous times over, is what do you consider Glitchtrap? Is it what is just another version of William Afton because he always comes back, he never dies? Is it William Afton's like consciousness, kind of like Voldemort with the Horcrux in Harry Potter? His consciousness was split into the circuit boards, and one of those circuit boards were scanned in by Phasma employee technicians or Phasma employees, because remember, in Help Wanted, the VR game is not just a VR game just for us in the real world. It's a VR game in universe to, make fun of the spooky ghost stories of Phasma Entertainment and basically reboot the entire franchise. And just as like a cost-cutting measure to speedrun the whole thing, they saw these like circuit boards, like other like electronic parts. One of those things was the circuit board that had William Afton's code, soul, something that possessed Glitchtrap, so it was a literal virus. So what do you consider Glitchtrap then?
But then, how does Fiona turn into Glitchtrap? We are so back. Mysteries are back on the menus, boys. And that's pretty much all I think is relevant to cover today. But let me know what you thought of the game in the comments below, and if you still need to catch up on gameplay...
Cool. Alright. 1 second here. If I can pull up... Let's pull up this, because why not? I don't know. I like this image. It's iconic. Has a lot of things to talk about with Gregory, Vanessa, and Freddy in the Princess Quest ending of Security Breach. So, yeah, there is one of many theories explaining the lore and story of Secret of the Mimic. Obviously, this is not the end of it. It's not the end of theories and trying to piece together what the story is for Secret of the Mimic. Because I still, even after this video, I still have many questions of what Secret of the Mimic is all about, right? What is the secret of the Mimic, right? What secret do we need to know? I brought this up in like my wish list going into Secret of the Mimic my 2 questions I had was getting the answer of whether Henry and Edwin are the same person or different. And it seems like pretty definitively now that they are different people, because Edwin says in tapes that he calls Henry out by name. So I'm like, okay, that's pretty definitive. So check 1 for there of one thing on my wish list that we got. But the other thing I mentioned is if we can get more of a concrete answer of what makes a mimic. Because, ever since VR Help Wanted, there's been this wave of pretty much any character has been connected to the Mimic software at one point. Like Glitchtrap. I don't know if he still is. Like I said earlier, is it, glitched circuit boards? Is it William Afton himself? Is it part of the Mimic? What is Glitchtrap? I know Baby was rumored to be tied to the Mimic at some point. Because in Night 5 of Sister Location, the one and only time you interact with Baby in Sister Location, you have to enter in a code, and then it's like rectangular, small, like circuit board key that you pick up from her shoulder and then put in your handheld device, and she continues to speak to you. People believe that itself was a circuit board that is the Mimic, aka tying Baby to the Mimic. Helpy is tied to the Mimic, which we especially see a lot in Ruin, aka the first game where the Mimic actually played a part in the series. Especially because there's two versions of Helpy with a Y and Helpy with an I. And yes, that is a big part, that is a big difference. So I was just hoping, do we get more concrete answer? What makes a Mimic? What is the actual Mimic software? And what is a Mimic and what isn't a Mimic? And coming out of this game, don't think we have that answer. And I'm hoping we do have that answer at some point. In what makes a Mimic, what doesn't make a Mimic. I would say other questions I have. Trying to think of what I haven't said when I was doing my long tangent review following my playthrough game and everything when it comes to the story. Trying to think of what I haven't said. Because I feel like I've said everything I need to say following the game and everything, of how a lot of questions. Chica, once again, is now all of a sudden the most important character in the entire series. Now that it's been stated that Edwin pretty much created everything that we know in the series, then what did Henry do then? What did William Afton do? Things that we previously thought were Henry and William Afton creations is now all up in the air and up for debate, because now it's like, well, was it Edwin's doing and Afton just put a name on it? Which, that's very, very interesting. Like, for instance, the Funtime Electronics had the Afton Robotics LLC, copyright. Well, what if it was an Edwin creation, Afton just copyrighted the technology and put his name on it, even though it's not his? Right? How does that play a factor? The Meeker Melodies, I would say, is a big question mark now, because we know the whole point of the Meeker Melodies from the books, from one of the Ultimate Character Encyclopedia guides, talked about how they were made to avoid copyright. Like, it's literally stated in the books that someone like Ned Bear was a bear with a southern accent and was intentionally made to be different to avoid copyright. Because obviously, someone like Freddy Fazbear is very popular, so to avoid copyright, they had to do their own thing but keep the bear identity still, right? So now, with that, especially because we always thought Henry made this, Henry made this, Henry made this. Well, now it's more of a question mark of, well, what if Edwin made it? Then it's like, well, then who made the Meeker Melodies then? Because we previously thought it was Henry, but now with this game and pretty much everyone coming to the conclusion that stuff that Edwin made was stolen by Henry and William Afton, then where does the Meeker Melodies play a factor in this? Right? And then, of course, the whole idea of who actually is the Core 4 anymore? Monty? Is it Freddy? If it's not Freddy, when does Monty play a role? Because it very clearly is before Security Breach in the year like 2020, 2023, something like that. I know it's 2020s is the Pizza Putz era. very clearly, we see a Gator Springlock animatronic in this game that takes place in the 70s. So very clearly, Monty, his state is now in question. So, ton of question marks. And also, one more note before we go and everything. One of the other Springlock suits you get into in that ending where you're in that pizzeria is a dog animatronic. Now, we have seen a few dog animatronics in the series. I don't think it's Fetch, the dog that is basically like a weird messed up genie where, you know, you wish for something and like a dog it fetches, but it takes things a little bit too literally, right? Like, if I'm not mistaken, it's a story where, you know, the character says like, you know, oh, I, you know, hate this person, I, you know, wish they would just die or something like that. Well, Fetch the dog hears that and then goes, kills them, and like brings their like head or arm or back, something like that. And it's like, yep, I indeed killed them and I brought them back. So it goes back to, you know, saying with the genius of like, be careful what you wish for. But that's not the only dog, because in the good old days of FNAF 1, there was the rumor that there was a Sparky dog animatronic. And if I'm not mistaken, the theory happened because one of the cameras, I want to say it was the backstage, like, endoskeleton room. People like photoshopped a dog in the camera, and they thought, oh, that's like the secret animatronic. But like Scott Cawthon said, like, yeah, there is no like dog animatronic in FNAF 1, but that's why in the FNAF movie, where you get the infamous Matt Pack cameo, goated, the diner is Sparky's, because it's calling a reference to that. The dog animatronic rumor, theory, that's just a theory, named Sparky. So, yeah, ton of questions about Secret of the Mimic, where it fits in the whole lore, timeline, ton of questions. And yeah, I would say just very curious of what other stories, theories people come up with for this game and everything, because there's a lot to talk about. And yeah, that's the question that I think we still need an answer, is the Fiona technology, then the Mitsis technology we see in Ruin. We need some connective tissue, because at this moment, how do we go from the Fiona technology that maybe is part of M1, the Mimic technology, but now you have Mitsis, which is a security system to lock away the Mimic? Need some answers there. Need some confirmation from Steelwool, Scott, someone, because it don't make no sense.